question as to the sorts of... Hi everyone, this is Rachel and thanks so much for joining me for the final Flip Collaborate for Literacy Across the Curriculum, the assignment 2 folio. In this video, I'll be explaining the requirements of this particular assignment and helping you to be able to come to the live Collaborate, able to do lots of brainstorming in relation to the assignment requirements and of course ask questions. So the assignment is due on Monday of week 12 at 5 p.m. It is 2,500 words in length, give or take 10%. So your range is anywhere between 2,250 and 2,750 words. The assignment is weighted at 60% of your overall grades for this unit. The folio has 3 parts. First of all, 2 lesson plans, both 600 words, so 1,200 words in total for your lesson plans. You'll be writing a lesson plan for upper primary, so either Year 5 or Year 6, and one for lower primary, so Foundation, Year 1 or Year 2. And your objective is for students to learn subject area knowledge or learning area knowledge, plus the literacy elements within it. You'll write an 800-word rationale, and this is where you'll be able to explain how your lesson plans show your knowledge of literacy across the curriculum. Finally, you'll write a critical reflection of 500 words where you'll be reflecting on your own personal literacy, and this will include your knowledge of literacy across the curriculum. So the word counts recommended on this particular slide, these are a guide. There is the scope to vary these slightly. So for example, if you find that you don't quite need 1,200 words on the lesson plans, that's okay. You can devote these extra words to either the rationale or critical reflection. Please be mindful though that the word counts do give a suggestion as to the sorts of detail that is needed in each section. So while you can make variations, don't make the variations big. So part 1, your lesson plans. You've been given a template in the assignment information and you can use these to create 2 class lesson plans in the same learning or subject area. So that is the first step in the process. Choose a learning area. Assignment 1A and 1B focused heavily on science. And because you've now got a proficiency in the teaching of science and the literacy as a general capability or literacy across the curriculum within science, we'd like you to now apply this knowledge to a different learning area. It can't be English either. So choose from HASS, Maths, the Arts, Technologies, Health and PE, and so forth. Then choose a content descriptor. A single content descriptor is sufficient, though you can choose more than that if you like. Just be mindful that the more content descriptors you have, the more learning objectives you need to include and the more teaching and learning and assessment that has to take place within a single lesson. So don't necessarily think you need to overcomplicate this. Best advice, I think, is to keep it as simple and do simple well. Once you've chosen your content descriptor or content descriptors, identify the literacy elements within it. So what is the word, grammar, text and visual knowledge, and overarching comprehension and composition of texts. Once you know what the literacy demands are of this particular learning area, you can use these to write your learning objectives. So these will target both the literacy and the learning area. It's really important though that this is not a literacy lesson or it's not an English lesson. You're still teaching a learning area. So make sure your learning objectives are, for example, maths learning objectives or HASS learning objectives. Decide how the learning objectives will be assessed. So here you might consider formative assessments or summative assessments. Ideally you'll have both because teachers want to be assessing along the way, so gauging students' prior knowledge and their understanding and demonstration of skills throughout the lesson, and of course measuring that against the learning objectives at the end of the lesson. Finally, you'll devise sequential activities, And because you're all quite expert in lesson planning now, you will understand that lesson plans have an introduction, a main section, and a conclusion. When devising this sequence, you could choose a pedagogical framework, such as the teaching and learning cycle or other framework. And if you're using one of these, then it's possible to use the different stages of the framework to guide the sequence of what happens. The teaching and learning cycle, as an example, you could use the whole cycle, or you could target a part or particular parts of it. It's entirely up to you. Other things to consider: reiterating the teaching and learning cycle. So if your lesson requires students to know or to compose a particular genre of writing, then you might find that the teaching and learning cycle is a good approach for this. You'll be considering what texts you could use to support the learning of content, the use of multiliteracies and ICT applications, and finally, as stated, how you're going to assess those literacy components. So when it comes to writing the learning objectives, it's really important these are clear and concise and achievable. You'll find that using action verbs, and there's a hyperlink there to some resources, they help to direct the focus of the lesson. So what is it specifically that you want students to know or to do? You might find acronyms such as WALT, We Are Learning To, or SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-phased. These are good to help guide and check that the learning objectives are achieving that clarity, specificity, and so forth that they need to. Here's an example taken from the HASS curriculum. So by the end of the lesson, students need to be able to compose verbal and written questions, beginning with what, where, how, and why, to ask their parents and grandparents about their childhoods. So the understanding of those verbs as question stems, so this is a reflection of grammatical knowledge of questions, and composition of text, so composing questions or maybe an interview, a verbal or a written interview. This is students composing that text. Finally, create a Venn diagram to compare their parents' and grandparents' childhoods with their own. So this is an example of comprehension of text as students understand what those differences are, and composition of text as they show their understanding through a visual representation known as a Venn diagram. So in relation to the HASS content descriptor, pose questions about past and present objects, people, places, and events. You'll see from the learning objectives that I've written here, while these definitely focus on the literacy of this content descriptor, in other words, the grammar, text composition, and text comprehension, they are very clearly HASS learning objectives. So this isn't an English lesson, it's still a HASS lesson that's targeting the literacy within it. The rationale for lesson plans. So while the lesson plans show what is being taught and how it's being taught, your rationale explains why the content is being taught in this way. And this completes your demonstration of pedagogy, the what, the how, and the why. Some ideas to consider when writing your rationale. First of all, it's a critical reflection, so you can write it in first person. You can use I, me, my, and so forth as you discuss what you've included in your lesson plan and why. You'll be considering how children learn literacy within specific subject areas. So you might be linking to the different pedagogical frameworks or strategies, approaches, etc. that you've used, and why these are useful for developing students' vocabulary or grammar or ability to compose different types of texts, etc. You'll consider the texts that you're using, whether these are stories or multimodal texts, videos, etc. Multiliteracies and ICT/digital media, how do these play a part in children's literacy development? What other resources might you include? How are you going to assess it? Have you included authentic teaching and learning opportunities? So perhaps it's an excursion, perhaps it's an experiment, perhaps it's a guest speaker and so forth. Anything that you can try to make the classroom learning environment or the learning opportunity authentic for children. You might consider the literacy dimensions and conventions. So looking at Green's 3D model and the literacy demands here, operational, cultural and critical, and the conventions are coming in. What are the rules, the literacy or the language rules, so spelling, grammar and so forth. Engagement, differentiation. So this list here, this is not a list of what you have to include in your rationale. Rather, it's a list of what you might include just to stimulate your thinking. Here's an example. Additional visual support such as symbols for beats and rhythms assist visual decoding processes and therefore literacy skills. Visual elements such as symbols, letters, words and notation are part of both literacy and music and engage visual memory and support students to make meaning. So here, this example from a music lesson, so this is a rationale of what's been included in a music lesson. So you can see how this is stating what's been included in the lesson plan by reference to visual supports and those visual elements. And there's an explanation of why these have been included in relation to literacy and other factors. And to strengthen the relevance of all this, the claim is backed up with a citation. So this is evidence-based lesson planning. The third part of your folio is your critical reflection. And in this, we're inviting you to think about how your personal literacy and your knowledge and understanding of literacy across the curriculum has changed throughout your studies. And in turn, how has this prepared you for your work as a teacher? So things that you should reflect on include Green's 3D model. So your knowledge of those literacy conventions, the rules, and the demands, operational, cultural and critical in relation to those dimensions. So this particular unit used Green's 3D model as the framework for identifying literacy. It's a really transferable model which you might find that you use in your professional practice. We want you to have a think about what you've learnt about this and how you might use this in the future. You might consider your strengths and areas to develop in relation to this or any other aspect of the unit materials. We also want you to be thinking about your personal literacy competence. So as educators, and some of you are already in the profession, some of you are working in schools in other roles, but you'll all likely soon be undergoing a transition from a pre-service teacher to an active teacher working in Australian schools. And to do the work as a teacher, you do have to have advanced literacy skills. So we want you to think about and celebrate your growth in personal literacy throughout your studies at Swinburne Online. Think about how your skills in critical reading, writing and oral communication have developed. You might refer to evidence such as how you've read education or other school-based documents or learning materials and so forth, textbooks, etc. You might refer to feedback you've been given from mentor teachers that have complimented you or given you advice about how you're presenting to students and so forth. Feedback from ELAs in relation to any of your assignments. The actual demands of the assignments, so how you had to read, write, present, or the things that you've experienced as part of your learning journey. And you might even make reference to Landtide. If you happen to have done this and you happen to have done this successfully, then this in itself is showing that you've got advanced literacy skills. So what you need to submit is a single Word document, please, that includes your 2 lesson plans, rationale and critical reflection. Any references used in those three parts of the folio will be combined into a single reference list. And if you happen to have included any additional resources in your lesson plans, you can add these to an appendix. The rubric is holistic, so this means that